Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters studio. I'm your host, Mitch. Glad to have you here. And I guess Eddie's here too.
Hello.
Yeah, Eddie just decided to, without ever notifying me, just kind of, break into my house, say, here's a script, and we're gonna go through an episode. So Eddie, why don't you, since you, did all this work, what are we talking about today?
First of all, you need a better home security system. Second of all,
if you are a home security system company and you would like to sponsor this episode
and never see any other podcast episodes
exactly.
again.
Go ahead.
All right, today's episode is about powerful cards that don't translate so well to casual Commander.
Wait, Eddie, I thought I should be just using the most powerful cards in Magic. Shouldn't I just be using those in all my decks?
That is generally true, but power is in the eye of the beholder sometimes.
Like those new creatures in D&D, the beholders, right?
Exactly,
okay.
Yeah. So they get to dictate what cards go in which decks.
Got it. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
No, but really, so there's some powerful cards that you might see in what are generally termed competitive Commander decks that you'll be looking online, EDH Rec or any of the deck sites, and you'll be like, oh, that card, I just don't get it. Like, why is this card powerful? Why is this card strong? In all the games that I've played, it seems like it would be pretty bad, but these people are paying $10,000 for the deck, so they must be right.
Oh, yeah. And it's showing up in, X percentage of decks, too. So you're like, okay, well, if 20% of people say that this card needs to go in this deck, then I need to make it work with this commander. For whatever reason, other people are doing it. So I feel like I'm missing out on something, so I need to figure out, how do I make this card work versus, actually thinking, does this card work for the deck or not? Just because it's powerful in one build, it's not going to be powerful in another.
Yeah, so we're here to tell you that trust your instinct. Sometimes cards that you see online are in fact bad for your deck, and a card that costs 1/1000th as much will do you better.
Yeah, it's kind of synergy versus power sometimes. It's kind of an interesting battle that we're going to kind of get into the nitty and gritty.
Yeah.
First mistake of the episode. I'm sure
we'll have it in the credits.
Mistake counter. Yeah.
Yep. All right. So a little bit of preface before we get into it. We're going to be using some shorthand here. First of all the data we're getting when we're listing numbers for competitive decks is coming from a user called Nullmage on Moxfield. Moxfield is a deck building site, and they list every month they check what are deemed to be competitive Commander decks from a pretty reliable source, the EDH decklist database it's called, and they tally up how often a particular card is viewed, and then using that number they can say, like, this card is played in this many decks, this card is played in this many, so you can basically get almost a tier list of sorts for competitive Commander.
The most played cards in CEDH, essentially.
Right. And so before we get too far, there are some caveats to that. Number one, the decks aren't really weighted in any way. So although there's 200 decks on this database, by far and large, competitive Commander has a few decks that stand above all the others. So even though those decks take up more of the meta, they aren't really weighted as such in the data.
Sure. There's no such thing as perfect data, especially with this as well. You also just can't even tell if a deck is actually built physically and someone actually plays it, or they just entered it online.
Right, and that brings us to our second caveat of imperfect data. For our casual side of things, for comparison, we're using EDH Rec. EDH Rec, great. It's one of the best tools out there for Commander, but it also has its own blind spots. Number one, competitive decks are also included on there, which isn't really a downside, but for this episode's purposes, it can kind of mix the data a little bit. So they
definitely need to, just because of that inconvenience for us in the future, just split those out for us. Thank you. Appreciate that.
The other thing is just inherently with how Commander is played, people that watch YouTube videos on Commander, people that build deck lists online that show up on EDH Rec are the more enfranchised, the more people who focus more on synergy and deck building and all these things, whereas the more casual Commander players out there probably don't even have their deck lists online.
Or if they do, they might have just bought the pre-con and literally just entered that online thinking they were going to adjust it and then just left it that way. So then the pre-con is essentially adding all those cards to, increasing the percentages for just the pre-con cards.
So in other words, all boils down to these numbers are helpful. They give us some perspective, but they're imperfect. So take everything with a grain of salt.
As with most things that I say, and everything that Eddie says.
Absolutely. It's all best with a little bit of salt. All right. So we've kind of discussed all of the caveats. So now, before we get any further, let's also kind of define our terms. So competitive commander.
Sure. CEDH, competitive EDH.
Yes. So it is not a separate format.
Nope.
All the same rules, all the same cards. But it is differentiated in a few different ways. And the deck lists, the cards that we're going to talk about, really exemplify some of those differences. Number one, the mana curve in these decks tends to be extremely
one.
low. literally.
Yeah, it's very, very low compared to casual, which is going to have a higher mana curve, trying to do kind of, I'd say, bigger, splashier things that might take more time to actually set up. Or have, bigger, not dumb effects, but, Ambratu's Augury is an amazing card, and I love it, but it's probably not going to see. I hope that's not seeing play in CDH. I'm not just misspeaking.
I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure you're safe there. Yeah. So casual commander decks are going to be anywhere from like 2 on the very low end all the way up to like 5 or more, depending on what you're playing.
Yep.
So because these curves are so low in competitive decks, they also tend to be extremely fast. Like they can present turn 1, turn 3 wins. I mean, if they're left unimpeded.
Technically turn 0 wins even. You can just win on your first turn before anyone else has actually done anything.
Yep. So all these principles for competitive commander lead to the cards that we're talking about to be really good in that environment and kind of lacking in a more casual environment.
Yep. Very quick games, low curves, extremely fast. And then, some cards that work very well in that, but might not work very well in casual. That kind of has a different pacing to it.
Right. So I know I brought this nice outline when I broke into your house and everything, but
but I'm going to ignore it. Let's just toss it out.
We're going to touch on one that I think really exemplifies all of this stuff really well, and then we'll kind of go back to the top of the list. So the one I want to bring up first is a card called Ad Nauseam.
Gotcha. So what page are we on? Sorry, this is an outline.
Second page, middle.
Page. I see it now.
There you go. So Ad Nauseam is a black instant. I believe it costs 5.
I believe 3 black. Is that right? Let's see from memory.
Here we go. Ad Nauseam, 3 black. You got it. Instant. Reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand. You lose life equal to its mana value, and you can repeat this process any number of times.
Okay.
That's the whole card. Also, don't look at the art too closely. It will give you nightmares.
Yes. It is not the nicest looking card.
No. So Ad Nauseam is a card that just shines in competitive formats.
Yeah.
And like I said at the beginning of the episode, you might see this card online and you're like 5 mana and like you said, you might flip into Amanatau's Augury.
Yeah. There goes 8 life.
Yeah. So you just paid 5 mana for the privilege of drawing a card and losing a life.
Yep.
And Amanatu's Augury is just one amongst many cards that costs, 3 on up mana.
Yeah, and not that all your spells are going to have 8, mana value, but mana value is so hard to remember to say.
We're getting there. We're trying.
But yeah, even if you hit a couple of 5s, though, that's going to take out a lot of your health versus in CDH, a lot lower mana curve.
Yeah, we were just saying, if you include lands, which have a mana value of 0, the average mana value in most competitive decks is going to be between 1 and 2. So if you just think about it, Ad Nauseam, you can pay 20 life to potentially draw about 20 cards on average. So that's 5 mana, draw 20 at instant speed.
Yeah, that's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Take that. Yeah, versus, in casual, that might be 5 mana, draw 5 and lose 10 life.
Yeah. At that point, there's so many other effects that translate better in casual, whether it's like Night's Whisper, Sign and Blood, like all of these types of cards. So we're just going to discuss some of these cards like Ad Nauseam that you might see out in the wild on the internet in play groups. And your instinct is like, that seems like a terrible card for casual. And it might not be terrible, but it's at least not getting you the same mileage in casual that it would in competitive.
Yeah, and in a different deck, it's going to work really well. But in your deck, it might not work all that well. So yeah, again, trust your instincts, except when you shouldn't.
Yes, always go to the commander's quarters first. If it's in that deck list.
Exactly. Then it needs to stay
good.
in there. Don't
It's
adjust
good.
those. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, so now are we back on track?
Let's go back on track.
Okay.
I think
got it.
otherwise we're going to
You
get
made this nice
all over
outline,
the
and then
place.
you just jumped.
Just wrecking the place. All right, so the first one is a little bit contentious, and it's been talked about before.
Yep.
And it's fetch lands.
Yeah, I mean, fetch lands are definitely something that, yeah, it's something that's like, okay, should I go spend $60 a card or whatever they're at right now for all of my decks, for all these fetch lands that I need to make sure that I'm thinning out my deck, to make sure I'm getting the perfect, shock land that I need to go get, to make sure I perfectly fix my mana. Do I need all that? Do I need to spend an extra $400 on each deck just to make sure it's perfect lands?
And $400 is lowballing it because
I'm a budget player and I have no idea.
Mitch forgot that dual lands exist right there.
Yes. Okay. So I did. You have fetches. Oh, there says duels too. So yes,
Nice
alpha
try.
duels. Yes. Okay. Alpha duels. So do I need to spend 10 grand? Probably more. I don't even know. Do I need to spend an absurd amount of money, a car's worth amount of money, on each of my decks to make sure that it's got perfect mana fixing?
Short answer is no. You can definitely get a playable mana base all the way up to 5 colors on a much more strict budget.
I think my Golos deck has like 4 non-basics, and probably a little more than that, but like 10 at the most. There's a lot of basics in the deck. Even a 5-color deck, when built in the right way, can manage to work without a ton of, expensive non-basic lands.
Yeah, and so I think if you want to get fetches, like, we're not going to argue that they're not good. They absolutely are great.
Absolutely.
But the amount of power that you're gaining for each dollar that you spend is pretty incremental.
Incredibly incremental.
And they also serve other purposes in competitive Commander that doesn't really apply to casual as much.
Absolutely.
A lot of times there's shuffle effects that might be helpful. There's a card that we'll talk about in a little bit that you can kind of stack the top of your library, get rid of your worst cards, and then use a fetch land to then shuffle your library and get rid of chaff that you don't need.
Hopefully not get those 2 things back on top.
Hopefully not.
Or whatever number it is. We don't want to spoil the card yet.
Right. And so also competitive decks tend to run any fetch land they can. You might be, for example, say you're in blue and black. You can run Polluted Delta, which is blue and black fetch land, but you can also run Misty Rainforest, which fetches blue and green, forest and island, because they don't break Commander's color identity. And this lends to an extremely consistent mana base, and they need that in the competitive scene because, like we talked about, their mana curve is astronomically low, so they need the right mana
right away,
immediately.
Yep, exactly.
Whereas we can get away with, the triomes, we can get away with check lands, which make sure you have a certain basic land type, other things like that are much more budget.
Yep. Evolving Wilds.
Evolving
That's a fetch
Wilds,
land.
Terramorphic Expanse it is.
Air landscapes.
You're gonna be all right in casual Commander. If you have the cards, play them. They're great, but they are not necessary.
Yeah, if you don't have your perfect fixing by turn 3 in casual, you're gonna be fine. You've got another probably 5 turns for the game to actually last, maybe even more. Versus competitive, it's like, if you don't have your perfect mana fixing by turn 3, you probably already lost. So.
Probably. Yep. So, for example, we're going to go through some numbers here. So the numbers that we talked about were from those sources we talked about at the beginning. So, for example, we're going to use Polluted Delta, which is one of the most played fetch lands.
Yep.
It searches
Blue-black's powerful. Who knew?
Who knew? It is in 86% of competitive decks on the database.
That is quite high.
Yeah. However, for EDH rec, which we are using for our more casual numbers, it's in 14%, which is still a lot.
That is still a lot.
Because it's eligible to be in all sorts of decks.
Especially how expensive that card is. Yeah, blue and black are 2 of the most, I'd say, played colors in Commander. Blue, black, green are probably the top 3. And yeah, that's definitely, if, again, you're trying to really kind of hone in on your deck and, get it perfect, Blue Delta would be in it, sure.
Right. And so these numbers kind of go to show that, like, there is a space between competitive and casual. 86% of people in competitive think that Polluted Delta is necessary for their deck to win when they want it to win, whereas only 14% of the casual audience is willing to play that card if they could.
Nearly 75% less, 72% less, there's math. So
right.
Yeah, almost 3/4 of people are saying, yeah, I'm not going to spend up for that.
Yeah, so I think, honestly, this kind of reassures me that a lot of the Commander community and the casual side of things, understands that, like, yes, they could play the card. It is good. However, like we're saying, the bang for your buck, you can get other cards, whether they're ramp, card draw, towards the theme of your deck. Your money is better spent there unless you're really fine-tuning your deck.
Yep, exactly. Unless you want to go play competitive and need to get the exact cards and the exact lands out on turn 1 and turn 2.
Which, for the record, I love competitive Magic. I have a Rashmi deck that has, the fetch lands and everything like that in it. But
we always have fun, every now and then just playing, your most powerful deck. So I get to play Joyra every now and then. So the one episode, I think I called it the one deck I never play anymore. I do play it occasionally. That's only when we decide, okay, we want a really quick game. So, except for last time when it wasn't quick. Eddie was countering too many things.
Eventually, infinite turns happen. How it is.
All
right, so let's move on to the next part of our episode.
Yep.
These are cards that, in some way, shape, or form, are temporary ramp. They're kind of what we call rituals.
Yep.
The most popular of which in competitive decks is Lotus Petal. Lotus Petal shows up in 74% of competitive decks.
Should we tell everyone what Lotus Petal is? Although I'm sure it's on the screen.
I'm sure it's on the screen too if this channel is edited appropriately, but that's not my business. Okay, what is Lotus Petal?
You've got it pulled up.
Lotus Petal is a 0 mana artifact, and it basically just taps for 1 mana of any color, but you have to sacrifice it.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. I want to make sure that wasn't the spend one. I was going to misspeak.
No. Yep. So this is just 0 mana, and you can get 1 mana positive from it, but you're down a card.
It's a really worse Black Lotus, but it is legal in Commander.
Yes, that's a pretty appropriate way to describe it.
1/3 is effective.
So competitive decks really like this card because it allows them to get their commander out, which they really, a lot of times for grindier games, or for example, Godo, Bandit Warlord is a known competitive deck that if you get a certain amount of mana, you win the game. Congratulations.
If you can't be stopped. Yeah, exactly.
Whereas in casual, we don't really, in most cases, unless the deck depends on it, doesn't need to meet a certain threshold in the shortest amount of time possible. The longer game is going to be more impactful. So the fact that Lotus Petal is functionally card disadvantage is much worse in casual.
You're not investing kind of in a future resource. You're just kind of utilizing a resource right away and it's gone with Lotus Petal.
So competitive decks don't have to worry about it because if they reach the mana they need to, they win.
You win.
Game over.
The game's over. And then you shuffle up, play again, and if you get it again, you use it again. But in casual, if you play that on turn 2 and you use it for something, it's gone. And you just lost 1 card for 1 mana, and that usually doesn't add up too well when it comes to a casual game.
Yep, exactly. So there's a whole bunch of these types of effects. Dark Ritual, Lion's Eye, Diamond. Red has a lot of these ritual types of effects, and so they can be really strong in certain decks. But the card disadvantage does not translate to casual as well. So if you're thinking of including these cards, make sure that your deck is one of those that really needs to meet that threshold as soon as possible and doesn't suffer because of the disadvantage that you're giving up for it.
I would say, a quick note in here, I did put quick rituals in there. I put the word quick because of rituals like Mana Geyser. That one's still going to be effective in a lot of decks because that one is it's not a spell you're going to be playing right away. It's a 5-mana spell. You're going to wait until people have a lot of lands tapped, and then you're going to get upwards of 10, 15, 20 mana out of it. So you can get a big burst there. You're not trying to kind of just quickly, turn 1 Dark Ritual, okay, my card's gone. It's more of a, all right, this is the turn I'm going to finish people off, and it's going to work out well because it's kind of like more of like a finisher enabler, I guess.
Yeah, and the other decks that run it in competitive tend to be able to refill their hand at extraordinary speed. So they might play Mana Crypt, Lion's Eye Diamond, Lotus Petal, Mystic Remora. Then they crack all that mana and cast like a turn 1 Time Twister to refill their hand, mess everybody else's hand up. And great. You're in a perfect position from that. But that does not how most casual games I've seen.
Most casual players cannot afford a Time Twister.
Most people in general in the world cannot afford a Time Twister.
We'll get to that here in a bit.
We sure will. I also mentioned this one in that
last
sentence.
You did. You're spoiling all the cards before we get to them.
Okay, Mitch, you take this one.
Okay, so Mystic Remora. Can we pull that one up real quick? I believe, let's see, from memory, it is an enchantment that costs a blue. It has, now it's not from memory because you're showing it to me. Cumulative upkeep 1. Whenever an opponent casts a non-creature spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 4. So cumulative upkeep is kind of a weird old mechanic-ish. Basically, every single turn on your upkeep, you've got to pay its cumulative upkeep, and it adds an age counter to it, and you have to pay for the amount of age counters on it, right?
Otherwise, it gets sacrificed.
Otherwise, you have to sacrifice it. So essentially, first turn you pay 1, second turn you pay 2, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
So This card is obviously a fantastic draw spell in certain games. Like, if you're playing against players and they're playing a bunch of non-creature spells very quickly right away, then you're going to draw a lot of cards out of it because, again, players aren't going to be able to pay that for, or won't want to, and most definitely can't pay the for early.
Yeah.
So, in a competitive meta, players are going to be playing a lot of quick spells early. Again, like you just mentioned last time, Mana Crypt, Lion's Eye Diamond, Time Twister, even. Like, all those are just quick spells, early rituals. You're going to be drawing a ton of cards off of it in a competitive meta, versus in a casual meta, it might not have the same impact.
Yeah, I mean, casual metas are much more creature heavy, and Mystic Grimoire only cares about non-creature spells. So a lot of times, I play Mystic Grimoire in a couple decks, and people will absolutely love to just rub salt in the wound and just not play any non-creature spells, just play out all their creatures or just pass the turn because they aren't being threatened by losing the game the way they are in competitive. And they'll just wait till you have to pay like 3 mana on your upkeep, at which point it's a much worse deal.
Yeah, overall, your investment, you're getting a lot less out of it if you're playing it in a casual environment, generally. Again, I'm going to say generally, because if you're playing against a friend who's got a Spellslinger deck and they love their Spellslinger deck, go to town.
Yeah, this will absolutely work wonders for you. So for reference, this is in about 69% of EDH decks and 19% of casual decks. So that gap is like almost like Fetch Land. It's not quite like Lotus Petal, which is only played in 7% of casual decks. Mystic Grimoire is still showing up in like 20% of any blue inclusive decks,
and it's
a lot.
Not that cheap of a card. Nowadays. I think it's $7 to $10 or something like that. I mean, I guess cheap is relative depending, but
it's one of those cards, because Mitch mentioned it has a cumulative upkeep cost. That's not something that they're going to print into a standard set. It's going to have to be in a weird supplemental set.
Why not? Standard needs cumulative upkeep.
Bring back Mana Burn.
Bring back Mana
Burn. No, so it is still played a lot, and I think, like the fetches, this is still a very good card. Mystic Grimoire, more often than not, will at minimum replace itself. At most, it might draw you 10 cards. But there's other effects in casual that will work as consistently for you. For example, Heuristic Study translates to casual much better than I think Mystic Grimoire does, because it affects every spell type, creatures included. And you don't have to worry about that cumulative upkeep cost. You just pay the 3, then just ride it out.
You heard it here first, everyone. Heuristic Study, good in Commander.
Hot take.
Hot take.
Very hot take.
Hot take.
All right, so these spells up next are similar to Ad Nauseam. I think they're really flag posts of competitive and how it differs from casual.
Absolutely.
Because these spells are really focused on that narrow mana value spectrum that competitive decks love, that casual honestly doesn't care all that much about. So we're going to use Mental Misstep.
That is, I think that card definitely exemplifies all this the most when it comes to someone might see it in a list and go, okay, I need that spell for whatever situation is going to be, because it's definitely going to come up that situation, but it really doesn't all that much in Commander. I guess for one very famous Commander card it does, but other than that,
the most famous.
Yeah, the most famous Commander card. Okay, go.
Yeah, so Mental Misstep is a blue card. It's a blue instant. It costs 1 blue Fire Exia mana, so either 1 blue or 2 life. And it says counter target spell with converted mana cost 1.
So incredibly narrow, again, like you said.
Super
very narrow. I mean, it's a free counter spell, but, 2 life. It's a free counter spell. Basically. For anything that costs 1. Exactly 1, though. So
your Soul Ring.
Exactly. Soul Ring, card mentioned earlier, most famous card in Magic in Commander. Yes, you can counter a Soul Ring.
Ooh, it does also counter Bobble.
No, do not counter Bobble with that.
That would be the best.
You're right, does counter.
I take it back. Run this card all the time.
Please don't. Counters the most powerful card in all of Commander, the Bobble.
Right, but most of the time, seriously, this will be a pretty dead card in casual. So, for example, this is in 66% of EDH decks. That's how often people want to play Mental Misstep.
Because, again, of the number of 1-mana spells that are in EDH that people are playing, you're probably going to have a target for it.
Yeah, nearly every turn. Plus, you don't have to hold mana up to threaten it. You can completely tap out. Whereas it is seeing play in 8% of casual decks.
Which, even though that number might not seem all that high, that is really surprising.
Yeah, I would have thought it would be much lower, frankly. And I think this might come back to our other caveat at the beginning of the episode, where people that are more enfranchised, the more competitive, the more power-focused players are also more likely to build their decks online. And so those decks show up in EDH rec more than actually is representative of the format in general that you're going to see in your game stores and actually play in paper. because 8% of decks, that just, I mean, like we talked about, there's Soul Ring, there's some tutors that you might see, ramp spells, but honestly, like most of the big impactful spells in casual are going to be in that, 5+ mana range.
Sure, yeah, the big kind of heavy hitters, the finishers, absolutely. Or even if this countered things that are at 2 mana, at least you could get most of the mana ramp in Commander 2. So, you got your rampant growth, you got your signets, that kind of stuff. So if this was converted mana cost 2, it would make a little more sense to me. But yeah, the lower the mana curve goes, the more this makes sense. And so the opposite is true.
Right. So this is a perfect example of a card that you might see online. You might look at a powerful Kess Dissident Mage list or what have you and see like, oh, like every single Kess deck is running Mental Misstep. I should be running Mental Misstep.
And you're like, oh, it's a free spell. Why wouldn't I run it? It's a free counter spell. It's basically free Fierce Guardianship.
Yeah, no. But also, I think what a lot of people forget is that every card in your deck has a cost. It's a sunk cost. By including a card like Mental Misstep, you're not including a card like a Fierce Guardianship.
Yep.
And so that, to go completely off topic, is basically why Lutri is banned.
Yeah, I was actually about to go on that too. And I was like, I don't know if I should do that because we're going to get some free the otter comments.
Yep.
No, don't free the otter.
Don't free the otter. The otter is an evil being. Or at least keep him banned as a companion, but allow him as a commander in the 99. That's
casual groups can obviously do that.
Yeah.
Any group can do that.
But Lutri does not have that same sunk cost. No. You're not actually using a card out of your 99 to include it. Whereas Mental Misstep, that's the reason it's not good in casual. Because instead of playing another card that's going to be good in nearly every situation, you're using this very narrow card.
Absolutely. I could not have summarized it better.
No, you couldn't have. All right.
No, you're a jerk. All right, I'll take this one then.
Yep, Mitch has this one.
All right, Brainstorm. So Brainstorm we did kind of allude to earlier. It is an instant, I believe, for a blue. We don't have it up right now. It's up on the screen, but not in front of me. Draw 3 and then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, perfect. Got it. So Brainstorm, in this one, these numbers always surprise me when I see them.
It's true.
Okay, so here we go. 64% of CDH, and we'll talk about why that makes sense here in a bit. 29% of casual.
Yeah.
That is a huge amount. I mean, 1 out of every 3 decks essentially is running a Brainstorm that can run a Brainstorm.
Yeah. So we were seeing gaps of like, 3 times as many competitive decks, or like 10 times as many competitive decks were running the same card compared to casual. But this one's very narrow. Like,
it's
only twice as many.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. So it's draw 3, but you lose 2. So you're essentially, netting 1.
Plus, you're spending the card.
You're spending the card, so it's a simple cantrip. Is essentially what it is. Now, does it have applications outside of that? Yes, but many of those applications are more impactful in CDH versus casual.
Absolutely. So we talked about those fetch lands earlier. So the beauty of Brainstorm in competitive is that you can draw 3, and then you get a pretty good look of what you got in your hand, and you say, these 2 cards I don't need. I'd rather see any other cards but these. Put those 2 back, and then crack like a polluted delta, and then voila, you go find your land. You shuffle your library. Those 2 cards that were garbage in that scenario earlier are now replaced with, hopefully, much better cards.
Yeah, and if you're running a good amount of lands that can actually fetch, then you've got a higher percentage chance of actually shuffling those cards away. But in casual, if you're not running a ton of fetch lands, I mean, unless you got your Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic Expanse or your Landscape or whatnot, there's a couple, yes, but you're definitely not going to be shuffling it away nearly as much.
Right, and like fetch lands, like all the other cards we talked about, there are certainly homes for Brainstorm in casual.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
If you're playing cards that care about card draw, like Teferi's Ageless Insight, now this is a draw 6, put 2 back.
Yep. Or if you've got a commander like the Locust God that's like, hey, I drew 3 cards, here's 3 insects. Like, that works. Or like Golos, who cares about the top of your library. You can set certain cards on top and then cast them for free, because Golos is a very fair commander. Anyways.
Maybe Golos is why this is so high.
Maybe. Golos, I guess Golos is like the most played commander these days.
That might actually be it.
Take out the Golos percentage and we'll see where we're at.
That would be super interesting.
But I mean, yes, it does make sense in certain decks, but for the most part, again, I think players overestimate just how effective this is going to be. Like, you play it turn 1. Cool. All right. I don't have all that good of a hand, but I have a Brainstorm in it, so I can get rid of some things and, hopefully draw some better things. You're still drawing into worse things. The 2 cards you put on top, you're not going to be able to get those away again unless you've got a fetch land. So, you're still getting those bad cards back in your hand.
Yeah, agreed. So, Brainstorm, Situationally, fantastic,
Yep.
but you need to know whether you're going to be in that situation regularly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, next up, go for it.
Next up, tutors. This will make pretty quick because it's just more broad strokes.
Sure.
But let's use demonic tutor. It's the most simple, cost-effective, and expensive, dollar-wise, tutor out there. So it's just 1 and a black, sorcery, search your library for any card. That's it.
Seems totally fair.
Yeah. And so this is seeing play in 62% of CEDH decks, which actually is a little low.
I'm actually surprised that's not higher. Again, any
yeah.
deck that could run it, I would think would be wanting to run
Yeah,
it.
I would
don't
assume
know
just
CDH,
non-black decks, but black is such a good color because of the tutors.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it's also played in 31% of casual decks. It's in 92,000 decks overall on EDH, right? A huge amount.
That's a ton.
So this is another one with a pretty narrow gap, like a 2-to-1 ratio. You'll see it twice as often in a competitive compared to casual. Tutors are a contentious topic for many reasons. A lot of people play Commander for the unique variant experience, whereas competitive, you really are looking for the win as fast as possible.
Yep.
So tutors make perfect sense in competitive, especially because oftentimes it's a 1 or 2 card combo that people are seeking out. So you can basically run a tutor as a second copy of your combo piece.
It's just basically, I need my combo plus 2 mana, essentially.
Exactly. Whereas in casual, combo is still a thing, but a lot of times you're going to be using the tutor to answer a particular threat on the board or set yourself up for a future play. You're not necessarily winning on the spot.
Yeah, and not saying that it's absolutely a good card, and is it twice as good as Diabolic Tutor?
Diabolic Tutor.
Diabolic, yeah, the one that costs 4. I mean, it's more than twice as good, but it costs half as much, and it does the exact same thing, and players run that in casual. And again, that's kind of more, hey, should I spend up, whatever Demonic Tutor is these days, 30, 40, 50, whatever it is, or can I just, get this less than $1 Demonic Tutor? You're going to be fine. Or Diabolic Tutor. I keep mixing up the two.
That's great. But yeah, just be aware that tutors tend to lead to kind of the samey experience every time.
If you put too many in a deck or whatnot, and they definitely can.
Yeah, so if you need them, great. We're never going to say tutors are bad. It's like fetch lands. If you got them, run them. But
well, and there's other ways to tutor as well that can be impactful for certain decks. Maybe like a shared summons. If you've got like a creature deck where it gets you 2 creatures, it's slower. But it's fine. I mean, it's 3 green, I believe, an instant, gets you 2 creatures from your deck and puts them in your hand. So yeah, that one can be more effective. It can set yourself up at instant speed before your turn and you get some creatures. Or maybe you need a specific card in your deck that has a specific mana cost. You use something that's got transmute, which can also help you with other things too. So
yeah, absolutely. This really kind of leans into when you're building a deck, don't pay attention to like inclusion rates on EDH, right? Don't pay attention to dollar value. Those are useful metrics if you're kind of deciding between 2 different cards maybe. But a lot of times it's like, what is this card doing for your deck? How is it furthering your game plan? And to that end, we were actually playing a game with I was playing a game with Alec last night, and he was playing a changeling kind of tribal deck, and he played a tutor. We'll find it after the episode because I absolutely can't remember its name. But functionally, it's a 5 mana card on
Coveted
its face.
Prize? Is that it?
That sounds right.
I think I think I know what you're talking about. Changelings,
Yep. So you turn all your creatures into all creature types, so it costs 1 black mana, so half the price of Demonic Tutor.
Yep.
And you search your library for any card, and then
if it's got a converted mana cost of 4 or less,
you
can
cast it for free.
Yeah.
So like
or whatever.
That is better. Than Demonic Tutor.
I think that's if you've got a full party is what that is. The requirement is. But yes, if
you can find an effect that does what you want, that's more synergistic with your game plan, it might be better than the best quotes card out there.
Absolutely.
So for 1 mana, he got to do way more than a Demonic Tutor would allow you to, which is great.
Yeah.
Fun deck building times.
All
right, we're almost we're over the halfway point, everybody. So let's get on to a couple cards that you're going to see a lot of times in competitive decks that I think, unlike Brainstorm, unlike fetches, unlike tutors, these do not translate well to casual at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think unless you've got a casual deck that's kind of leaning toward almost being competitive.
Yeah, it's aspirationally
competitive. Then I don't really see where this synergizes with many things. But I could be wrong, so let us know in the comments below why Eddie is wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to hear it.
Okay, so we got Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation.
Yes. So Tainted Pact, let's see, we've got that one here. Actually, just in the Mystical Archives in Strixhaven, so you might have seen this card recently.
Now I've got to put that art up specifically because you said it.
Well, I like this one also because it actually has the current rules text, whereas the old versions are just gobbledygook.
Yep.
So it's 1 and a black for an instant. It says, exile the top card of your library. You may put that card into your hand unless it has the same name as another card exiled this way. Repeat this process until you put a card into your hand or you exile 2 cards with the same name, whichever comes first. So for Commander, obviously this is a singleton format, except basics.
Basics, yeah. And again, if you're playing competitive, you might not have duplicates of basics.
Or any basics.
So, yeah.
So every single card in your deck is going to be different from every other single one. Whereas if you're playing, I don't know, a mono black deck, chances are pretty good that eventually you're going to run into 2 swamps, and then this effect is just done. This card is played in conjunction with Thassa's Oracle. As a win condition, very quick, very compact, very reliable, hard to interact with.
A better lab man, essentially.
Yeah, so Thassa's Oracle, 2 blue, ETBs is if you don't have a library or your library is less than your devotion to blue, congratulations, you win. So we talked about Tainted Pact. Demonic Consultation is much the same. It's just 1 in a black for an instant, where you remove the top 6 cards of your library from the game after you name a card. And let's see here. Then you reveal cards from your library until you reveal a named card. You put that into your hand and remove all other cards from the game. So you can literally say a card that you don't have in your deck.
That's usually what you would do.
Yeah. You could say Feldigriff.
Black Lotus. Oh, it's banned in Commander. I forgot. My bad.
Oops, don't have that in the deck. So then your entire library is gone. Thassa's Oracle, congrats, you win. So these cards are included. This was also surprisingly low, in my opinion. They're included in 45 and 40% respectively for Tainted Pact and Demonic Consultation.
For competitive.
For competitive.
If that was in casual, that'd be ridiculous.
For casual, they're a 10th. So this, I think people are onto it. These are bad cards for casual. Only a 10th of the inclusion rates at 4 and 5%. Interestingly, Thassa's Oracle is in 36% of competitive decks, which I also thought would be higher. But still 12%. Which
is very interesting. I do think that there are certain decks out there that do kind of have a backup lab maniac kind of win, and that's just another way to have it. You got that and the Jason.
Now that I think about it, I have one of those decks.
Exactly. Unesh. So you are adding to this 12%. You are just inflating the numbers.
I am.
Okay, we already covered the next one ad nauseum.
This next one is a hot topic for you. So.
I definitely have some strong opinions on this one. So Mana Dorks. Actually, I think I brought up on a couple other episodes at some point, but Mana Dorks make a lot of sense in competitive. Basically, okay, let me bring up one, I guess. Llanowar Elves. It is an elf that is a 1/1, and it costs a green, and it taps to add a green to your mana pool. And there's a lot of other Mana Dorks that basically just have this exact same thing. Birds of Paradise, essentially.
Arbor Elf is very popular in competitive because it untaps a forest. And as we talked about, dual lands are a thing, so you could have a forest island. So it actually functionally taps for green or blue in that
Absolutely.
situation.
So there's a lot of Mana Dorks, essentially. I'm talking about 1 mana Mana Dorks, essentially. So these, are very fast mana, all right? You're basically just ramping turn 1 and doubling up your mana, which is fantastic.
Yeah, it's like twice as good as Rampant Growth, right?
Twice as good as Rampant Growth, right? And that's really good in CDH, mostly because, again, it's a much quicker format. You're going to be playing, turn 1, okay, I ramped, perfect. Okay, turn 2, I might be able to win. Turn 3, maybe win as well. So you want to get that out really quick, and you just want to just get out and go. In CDH, there also aren't a lot of wraths that are run. And again, my apologies if I misspeak on this. I do not play CDH, but I have had discussions about this kind of stuff with CDH players. Yeah,
it's one of those things where it's really a meta call for CDH. Like if a lot of your opponents are playing a lot of Mana Dorks, you might run a couple cards that, can deal
with everything,
but they're very situational.
Generally, it's target removal and counter spells in CDH, though. And so basically, because of that, there can be a decent amount of Mana Dorks in play, and they're not all going to get dealt with because, you're not going to cast a Wrath. But when it comes to casual, it's going to be, again, a much longer game. And a Wrath pretty much always happens in a casual game. I shouldn't say always, but there are plenty of Wraths out there. There are plenty of games that I've played where there have been 5 or 6 Wraths cast in the same game.
Yep, those are some long games.
But yes, they are some long games. But chances are a Wrath is probably going to cast in your game. And when it does, if you just have a bunch of Mana Dorks out there instead of ramping in other ways, they're gone. You just lost all of your ramp. All of your investment is gone. So
whereas a Rampant Growth, that'll stick around most of the time unless you're playing against Mass Land Destruction, in which case I am so sorry.
Yeah, you're probably not playing casual. You're playing Mass Land Destruction. Yeah, so again, Mana Dorks, yes, incredibly effective and efficient ramp, but they are the least safe version of ramp. I mean, you've got, again, land ramp like Rampant Growth, obviously very safe. It's kind of a taboo to actually blow up lands, and outside of like a Guy's Cradle or specific lands, but it is unfortunately or not fortunately, and that's both the same thing. It is a taboo to just basically start wiping out someone's lands or just mass destruction of lands. So Yeah, your lands are probably going to stick around. Mana rocks are generally safe, or a lot more safe than mana dorks. It's a lot easier to blow up a lot of creatures than it is to just blow up a lot of artifacts and enchantments. Or typically, I'd say that you'd be doing that instead. So.
Yeah, and I think they also still have their place. Mitch's soapbox aside.
I'll stay off the soapbox for now. You go for it.
No, I think those are all totally valid points. And if you aren't running mana dorks for a reason, then you probably don't need them.
If you're playing an elf tribal deck, play Land War Elves.
Yep,
if you're playing decks that care about creatures in play versus, lands in play, then care about that as well.
So, for example, Tishana is an older Simic commander. I think it costs 7 mana. But it says when it ETBs, you draw a card for each creature you control. So if you play like Mana Dorks on turns 1, 2, 3, get a turn for Tishana, draw 4 cards. You're not down any cards if a board wipe happens. Plus, they accelerate you into your commander. So there are certainly situations.
Or Nikia of the Old Ways that cares about, not letting you play non-creature spells. So you need to ramp with, creatures. So there are definitely situations where that applies.
Yeah. So if your deck calls for it for a particular reason, Mana Dorks are certainly able to find a home in casual, but I wouldn't default to them the way competitive does for all the reasons that Mitch talked about.
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. Next one, a favorite card to talk about end of last year.
Yeah, we're to our last 3 here.
Yeah, last 3, we're getting there. Okay, so Jeweled Lotus.
Yes.
The acclaimed, this is Black Lotus in Commander, but not really.
Yeah, but still sometimes basically the same.
Oh, absolutely, and on the right turn. Yeah.
So similar to Lotus Petal, it's a 0 CMC artifact that you tap and sacrifice, and in this case you get 3 mana as opposed to 1, but the
it's got a caveat
is that it only can be spent to cast commander.
So I mean, essentially a Black Lotus in the right situation for the right card, but it's very specific on what you can use it for.
Yeah. So again, we talked about competitive decks and just how the card disadvantage that you're inflicting upon yourself by playing Jeweled Lotus is mostly negated in this situation, because you'll see decks like Godo, which, like we said, only really needs to reach 11 mana or so, and then you just win the game. Because Godo comes in, gets you a Helm of the Host, boom, if no one can do anything, you win. So
or
that
other
3
decks
mana
where
gets you ahead.
Or other decks where where I think you mentioned this earlier again, Eddie, where you basically say, okay, I cast all these spells, and then I Time Twister, and then we just, get new hands. So
that's
essentially
exactly right.
No card disadvantage there at all because you just replaced everything.
Yeah, Tymna's another very popular commander in the format. Tymna is card advantage, so if you get a turn 1 Tymna, chances are turn 2 you're going to draw a card because you got her out early. Urza is a card.
Urza is a card, and actually, Jeweled Lotus is even better in that deck because now it's just a Sapphire Mox or whatever it is.
Yeah. I mean, you could get a turn 1 Urza if you do sacrifice it. Play an island,
gross.
Jeweled Lotus, sack it, tap your island to draw 4 mana. Here's Urza turn 1.
Yep, lovely. Everyone wants to see that, right?
Absolutely. So, for some context, Jeweled Lotus is not the most popular card in competitive compared to some of the other ones we've talked about, but it's still in like 46%, just under half of all competitive decks are playing it, and 7% of casual decks.
Which that number does surprise me. And again, this card is $100 or something still.
Yeah, and it literally could go in any deck. Like it's a colorless artifact. It could go in any deck.
So yeah, again, with that price in mind, again, the 7% of casual decks very much surprises me because what it can kind of lead to might not be a good experience on either end of how it actually works out. Again, if you're playing in a casual environment, generally everyone's expecting to play, a couple of turns, more than 1 or 2. but
that's the hope.
It can very much easily lead to a non-game, essentially. Just someone just runs with the game right away and just wins. And essentially, okay, it's like, all right, you won turn 4, let's shuffle back up and play again. And hopefully you don't draw your Jeweled Lotus. But then on the other end, it can also be a very dead card. If you draw it, again, if your game's going 10 turns, or 11 turns or whatnot, and you draw Jeweled Lotus and your commander's already out, not doing anything for you. Or even if your commander isn't out, it's like, okay, I got 3 mana, but I probably could have used a different card to help me out instead. So
yeah, exactly. There's while it's not always going to be a dead card, at the very least, similar to the Mental Misstep discussion where we had, where it's kind of a sunk cost. Like you could just have a different card in its place that is applicable more broadly. So for example, we'll go back to Rampant Growth, an all-star. So you can pay 2 mana, get a land. It's not going to happen turn 1, but you can use that land that you find for any spell in your entire deck, and you can use it repeatedly. So most of the time, a card like Rampant Growth in the long run in casual games will do you better than a Jeweled Lotus, unless your deck really calls for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Cool.
Last two.
This
is another one. This one I think is interesting too, and brings up another angle to this discussion.
Yeah.
Time Twister.
And that's a card we have mentioned a couple of times. I don't think we actually read it yet, but
no, we have not. Nor have we mentioned the exact price tag. So
we have not.
Time Twister. 2 and a blue sorcery. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards.
So this is actually one of the Power 9, and it's actually the only Power 9 that is legal in Commander. The only one. All the other ones are banned. You got Time Walk, Black Lotus,
Ancestral Recall,
and then all the Moxes.
Moxes.
All those are banned. This one's fine.
This one is reserved list. So reserved list, if you don't know, is a list of cards that Wizards of the Coast has promised that they won't reprint. And because of that, and because of its power status and its effect, you're looking at, for let's say the International Collector's Edition, Scryfall says you could buy that for $1,300. And that's, there's definitely versions out here. Like I'm seeing some that are up to $13,000 depending on the one.
No, it depends on how well it's been preserved and that kind of stuff too.
Yeah. So this sees play in about half of competitive decks,
which is just absolutely absurd. I think is this the one you put them on?
Yeah. So okay, I was curious here and did a bit of napkin math. This says it's in 48% of competitive decks, but still 3% of casual. So a huge spread there. But it's in just blue, so still 3% of any blue deck. Still tallies up to 8,000 decks on EDH Rec where this card shows up. And I think this really goes to show that most deck lists that are on these sites don't necessarily get built in paper, or if they do, proxies might be used.
You're using the same card. Yeah, you're not going to go buy a second Time Twister, most likely.
Yeah, it costs 25 cents for a printed copy via, your local library. So Time Twister, let's say it's a $13,000 card and it's still used 8,000 times on EDH Rec. Let's do some napkin math. That's $104 million in one card.
Pocket change.
Yeah. So that makes me think, number one, I don't know if that many copies are in existence anymore.
Yeah, probably not.
But it goes to show Time Twister is in 3% of decks. Like if it actually even is a real card, the price of it is definitely scaring some people away.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean that is a factor in all this too, right? Price does kind of, when you're playing a more casual game, you might not be willing to invest as much. Now, there are definitely casual players that do. But, if you absolutely need to compete and you want to have, no proxies in your deck in a competitive environment, it's going to cost you a bit more because you need specific cards. A bit.
It is a powerful effect. I mean, shuffling your library and everybody else's library and graveyards and drawing 7 cards for all the reasons, like if you just toss out a bunch of mana rocks right away turn 1 and then end up refilling your hand, you were down to 2. This turns into a draw 5. Plus you get anything that you would use like Lotus Petal Wise back in your library, plus all of your opponents who probably mulliganed to get just the right hand now have to get rid of that hand
have a random hand
and have a random hand that they have no control over and might be much worse for them.
So 3 mana, this effect you really don't see anywhere near 3 mana. I think I'm trying to think of another card that does the exact same thing, but like 5 or 6 mana is probably what you're usually going to be spending on that effect.
There's been a few cards that Wizards of the Coast has printed that try to duplicate this effect. And
there's
I think
one that you can do from your graveyard, I think. Right?
Yep.
You have to actually get in your graveyard first.
Yeah, Flashback, where it basically is Time Twister because it costs 3. So there's been other variants of this effect that are pennies on the dollar that are going to be showing up much more. So if you want this effect in casual, there's definitely alternatives that aren't going to make your opponents, just puke in their mouths a little bit. All right. The last one. Another one that I think is really indicative of like the difference between casual and competitive. That's Abrupt Decay. It's a Golgari spell.
It's a sorcery for what? Black-green?
Oh, I don't even know if it's a sorcery. Let's see.
It's an instant. Isn't it instant?
It is an instant.
Instant for black-green, sorry. Instant for black-green. Abrupt Decay can't be countered by spells or abilities. Destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 less. So it's a specific removal spell. Instant speed, great. But it can't be countered, which is fantastic. But again, it is a specific removal spell where you can only hit things between 0 and 3 mana. Yeah,
and so... and non-lands, so most lands are going to be immune from this as well. So this card I think is interesting. Let's go over the numbers real quick. It's 35% of competitive decks, 15% of casual decks. So pretty, that 2-to-1 ratio again, like pretty popular in casual still. 22,000 decks. This one is interesting because it says it can't be countered by spells or abilities. that is much more relevant in competitive, where Force of Will, Pact of Negation.
Oh, and I absolutely need to get rid of that combo piece or I lose, essentially. And so, you can do that with this.
Yeah, this will get rid of anything you need. The mana curve in those decks is you're basically never or rarely going to see a card that costs more than 3. It'll be able to hit most things across the table. Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study, Mana Crypt, whatever it happens to be, Isochron Scepter.
Fast as Oracle, but then it's too late.
Yeah, you're already. But Isochron Scepter. And plenty of other things as well. Whereas in casual, you're really, most of the cards that are going to end the game for you are also going to be pretty expensive.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's why D-Spark is probably a much better removal spell. Again, different colors, but much better removal spell. Yeah, in Commander, because I believe that one's exile with 4 or above, right?
Right,
so
for Orzhov.
Yeah, you're restricting in the opposite direction, essentially. So, and there's no, can't be countered or whatnot, but still, like, you are getting rid of the big threats. Most commanders out there are going to be at the 4 and higher amount anyways. So if a deck is rolling on a commander, you can usually get rid of it with that or a multitude of other things.
Yeah, I think all of that is well stated.
Yeah.
So those are the specific cards that we had listed out here that are very popular in competitive decks. You might see them out on EDH rec pages. If you search for, powerful, insert your commander here, you might find deck lists that include these cards that, you're like, I don't think I need that.
Yeah. Well, and again, we're just saying they're not saying that they're not powerful. They are powerful, but again, it's situational power.
Yeah. So if you're in that situation, feel free, run it, do whatever you want.
Yep.
But if you're not in that situation, which I think is the majority of us, you're not crazy. These cards are not necessarily good in all situations, and they very well might be more synergistic options if you take the time to look.
Yep, absolutely. I could not have said it better.
All right. So there is one caveat we want to make. There's some cards that I think are kind of neat to think about. That are on the competitive list that are nearly 1-to-1. Like, they are as popular in competitive as they are in casual, and they translate extremely well, because we've been talking about cards that don't translate very well. It's the usual suspects you might see. Mana Crypt is the most popular card in competitive Magic at 99% of decks.
Yeah, I can't think of a reason not to run it in one of those decks, but I'm sure there is.
1% of those decks out there. I guess maybe Animar? That's not really meta deck necessarily, but Animar needs a lot of colored pips.
Yep, makes sense.
Soul Ring, no surprise, at 98%, and these numbers are pretty much Mana Crypt is included in much fewer decks in casual.
Just price consideration,
$100 to $200.
Yeah,
but Soul Ring is in like 98% of casual and competitive.
Yep, decks. I mean, Soul Ring's been reprinted in pretty much every Commander product, I believe. And so, it's definitely got its price knocked down enough where it can be affordable for many players.
Yeah, and the new kid on the block, Arcane Signet. I was surprised this is kind of low. This is only 54% of decks, both competitive and casual. So these are cards that, like, if you see these on the list and you happen to have them or have the money for them, they're going to do just as good a job in competitive as they do in Commander. They're fast mana, they're reliable mana. That's never a bad thing. You're not losing card advantage for them because they stick around.
One was considered as a mistake by Wizards.
And then Command Tower, which is a card that we don't talk about. We don't talk about Command Tower all that much, but it's just
funny to think about, because all these formats. Okay, I need to pay so much money for alpha duels, but I've got a better alpha duel.
It's not fetchable, but literally any color you need.
True. I guess it's not fetchable. That is true. That is true.
I mean, you don't need to fetch anything because it already does that.
You're just like, okay, turn 1, I've got a land that can tap for 5 mana if I've got a 5-color commander, and it comes into play untapped.
And like we talked about with Mystic Remora is a little bit more narrow. It ends up having that cumulative cost, where it's Rhystic Study. Other than its price tag, has none of those limitations, but also just as much of a pain in the butt in competitive to ask, are you going to pay the 1 as casual? So you'll see that in both play groups. So those were kind of interesting, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are good finds.
All right. So we're going to bring this episode to a close, unless you have any other parting thoughts you'd like to...
I'm really tired of hearing you speak. And also, you should probably get out of my house after breaking it.
Ouch.
I think the cops are looking for you.
All right. I'm getting the vibe here. All right. In closing, so there's basically no substitute for just putting some critical thought and a little bit of effort into your decks when you're adding cards. If you see a card that's on a list out there and you're just scratching your head on why is this card so popular? Why is it good? Am I really missing something? You probably aren't. It might just be kind of this aberration of the downstream impact of the competitive format. So yeah, kind of trust your instincts a little bit.
Yeah, look for synergistic options.
Yeah, and all this kind of goes to show that you don't need to shell out thousands and thousands of dollars on a time twister if your deck really doesn't need it. And you can find cards in casual formats that might do better for your deck than a time twister ever could. And be much cheaper for it. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think the main thing here is just think. That's all you got to do. Just think through it, and yeah, sometimes trust your gut, and sometimes don't. Very confusing.
Yeah, but I'll always tune into this channel. We'll never leave
Trust
you astray.
our guts.
Yeah. All right. So I'm kind of curious if you guys have played any of the cards that I've talked about and whether what we said resonates with you.
Yeah.
Or if we're completely off base. Because if you've played a card and you're like, these guys are absolutely insane. Like, this card is just as good in my casual
There's going to be a
decks.
lot of Mana Dork comments in the comments.
Yeah, I think Mana Dorks and Fetches will probably be the most popular hot takes on.
We shall see.
But looking forward to hear your thoughts below.
Yeah. In all seriousness, thank you for joining me today, Eddie.
You're welcome.
All right. And as always, thanks again, and have a good one.